Okay, so hey guys, and welcome back to another Axel 72 video, and in today's video I'm going to be giving my prediction for the Darren Till versus Luke Rockhold fight. And so if you are new around here and you haven't yet subscribed, please do so, like the video if you do indeed like the video, and feel free to join the Patreon as well. There is a good few members on there now, and I really appreciate all the support I've had with it. And you can request any kind of combat sporting related content, and I will try my best to do it. And the link will be in the description. Thank you very much again. And so this is of course, Misfits card. Of course, I've always done prediction videos for Misfits cards. I actually have done a prediction video for every Misfits cards to date, and things have been changing a bit with them. Obviously, boxing fans, you can like them or you can dislike, Misfits boxing, but it's still got its place. And it just seems like in more recent times it's been struggling a bit. I think they realized, they had this big deal when they first kind of came out, and there was a lot of hype behind it and everything, but then after that they booked in a lot of shows as a result of that kind of hype, and there was quite a few shows that just didn't deliver. They didn't get the attention that was expected. They really didn't, like I say, celebrate boxing that well or look really that good as events. And now they seem to lower down the amount of events, which I understand it's difficult to maintain a good boxing promotion, like I say, if the talent's just not really there. And they've lowered down the amount of events that they're doing, and they do seem to now be a little bit, better quality. I think that this is a good quality event, a pretty stacked event with some good names on it, but it does seem like they're also kind of heavily relying on one guy, and that is Darren Till. I mean, this is his third main event in a row. They had the Qatar card, was the last card in which Darren Till wasn't on, and that was, like I say, 4 shows ago now. With, they had the Dillon Danis one that fell through. That was meant to kind of break things up a bit, I believe. But they also, they had Darren Till versus Taylor. Then they had Darren Till versus Stewart, and now they've got Darren Till versus Luke Rockhold. It might have been Darren Till versus Dillon Danis that was even meant to be. I can't remember, but still, like I say, it seems like they are kind of heavily relying on him. I respect that he wants to be fighting a lot and he wants to be active, and when there's not got as many events, it means that he can be a bit more active. But just seeing, the same guy on each event, it does for the fans make, realise that there's not really much going on. Misfits was there for the big name entertainment stars, and Darren Tills provides great entertainment, but again, you would probably want to see somebody else leading the way a bit, and like I say, pushing Misfits, even just as another name alongside Darren Till, who is headlining. But nonetheless, it is still, like I say, a pretty good card here. And with all my Misfits cards, I go through the entire card and I'll give a prediction for each one. I can't guarantee it's going to be the best of kind of insights for each fight, because they always have fighters that, which, to be fair, you probably haven't heard of. And to be fair, I've done a bit of research, but it's not like I know them inside and out. I don't know how good of a skilled fighter they are, so again, some of the knowledge might be a bit restricted. But we'll start off with the main event, and of course Darren Till is coming off them back-to-back wins, stopping Anthony Taylor and then almost stopping Darren Stewart, which was an interesting contest where Darren Stewart got dropped badly in the first round and then managed to somehow survive and just kept going. He just took shot after shot after shot, big heavy shots. Darren Till was loading up a lot and landing clean straight onto Darren Stewart often, and he was just keeping on coming forwards, and he was pushing Darren Till back, and Darren Till was just happily sitting on the ropes, loading up. And I think just from him loading up alone was why he did get tired, and he did get quite tired in that contest too. And that's when Stewart actually started to have a bit of his own success. But I think they probably both will get tired in this contest. I don't think this is a bad, fight. I think on paper it's a little bit of a decent matchup. Luke Rockhold is someone who, of course, is a former UFC champion. He, was a great name in the UFC and had plenty of success. Like I say, beat some big names like Michael Bisping, for example. So, like I say, was a great, legend of the UFC, just like, somebody else in this card, which I'll talk about in a minute. But he obviously has had a couple of different occasions outside of the UFC in more recent times where, he's not looked bad. I mean, he got that good win in Karate Combat, which he was able to KO his opponent, but he did lose by stoppage against Mike Perry, which wasn't a KO or anything like that. He didn't get brutally knocked out, but he did, kind of quit a bit, after a jaw injury, which looked bad and was bleeding a lot. But it, probably wasn't the worst injury he's had to fight through in his career. So I don't know if he gets caught with a nice shot against Till or if he gets bloodied up a bit, if he's actually going to want to continue, if he's just going to want to wave it off. And, he's still in great shape. He's always been somebody who's been in great shape. And, like I say, at 40 years of age, he does look good for 40. But again, we'll have to see. Of course, he won via Karate Combat. He did rock Perry in that fight as well, which is not an easy thing to do. But, I mean, we did see Mike Perry versus Jake Paul, and then you could see the actual skill level and the difference between the BKFC guys and like the boxers, which have been training a bit more in just boxing. So I think that Darren Till is going to be able to win, and I think he's going to be able to win relatively comfortably via TKO in round 3. I don't think Luke Rockhold is going to be able to withstand the amount of punishment in which Darren Stewart was somehow able to withstand. And Darren Till is looking good in boxing. He's actually looking sharp. I would like to see that his conditioning is made a bit better, but again, I don't know how much effort he's actually putting into his conditioning at the moment because of, just his expectation to be able to win fights. So again, if that's a little bit more improved, I think he will be able to win. Luke Rockhold is always going to be somebody who he's going to have to watch out for. He has got power in his punches and he can fight and land well off the back foot, but I think Darren Till keeps a good enough range to be able to stay out of, the way of them big shots and, like I say, be able to get his own stoppage. Moving on to the co-main event, which is, an interesting one. It's Salt Papi versus Tony Ferguson. Never did I ever think that we would see this fight. It's a fight in which, makes zero sense, really. I mean, Tony Ferguson is a former UFC fighter who fought at the very highest level, former interim UFC champion, was meant to fight for the UFC title on multiple occasions and just got very unfortunate on just unlucky things happening to him as to why he didn't end up fighting Khabib. But, that was him at the height of his career. Then he went on an 8-fight losing streak, I think, in the UFC before eventually he was cut. And it just seemed like it was getting to a point where he just never wanted to stop fighting in the UFC and they would just never cut him. But eventually it seemed like that did happen, and now he's in there boxing with Salt Papi. I mean, Tony Ferguson, at the best of times, at the height of his career, was always somebody that was walking onto a lot of shots. And now, like I say, in his more recent fights, he's looked weaker and slower and less able to be able to dig deep like he did in the Anthony Pettis fight, which was, a brutal contest in however, the 2 rounds that it lasted, but it was so entertaining. There was so much blood. He managed to get up from being knocked down, Tony Ferguson, and, he was spinning. There was so much going on basically in that fight. I would recommend going and watching it if you have not done so already, but now he's not going to be able to move that well. He always had good power for the division at his height, but again, I just don't see it. I think Salt Papi's going to be able to stop him quite brutally in the second round, to be honest, and it's going to be a sad thing to see because, of course, nobody's going to want to see that, but that's just what I think is going to happen. And again, Salt Papi's coming off with a very good win as well against King Kenny, which was, of course, proper misfits type of fight, but he's got that youthfulness, he's got that explosion of that power, and I think he is just going to be able to catch Tony Ferguson early and be able to hurt him badly and get him out of there. Moving on to speak about a bit of a decent actual kind of boxing matchup in Ty Mitchell versus Sean Hemphill. And, Mitchell is coming off a good stoppage win against Idris Virgo, kind of exposing Idris Virgo. I never really rated Virgo that much. I always thought that, if he really wanted to stake a claim for himself, he should have gone into boxing. But instead, he was, like I say, messing around with the influences a bit early on. And then the one time that he actually kind of went in against a proper boxer in Ty Mitchell, he got stopped badly and didn't look very good at all. And that was a good win for Ty Mitchell. The only problem with what I see with Ty Mitchell is he's fighting with his hands very low. He's got quite a wide stance, and he's just bouncing around a bit and just trying to move slick and trying to move clean, but trying to catch you with shots coming in. But I just feel like there is a recipe where one time he's going to get caught with a big shot, and that's just going to floor him. Sean Hemphill is, I wasn't expecting to see him on this card. He just at the start of the year fought against Mark Jeffers on a boxer card, and that was a contest where he managed to cause an upset, and he beat Mark Jeffers on majority decision. He fought in the pocket, landed better shots, took a lot of punishment, but was able to keep coming forward, and like I say, just keep letting his hands go in the pocket. I think he's going to be able to beat Ty Mitchell here. I think that Ty Mitchell in the early rounds might be able to catch him with a few shots, but when Sean Hemphill isn't going out of there, I'll be intrigued to see how many rounds it is. If it's a 10-round contest, I think he's going to be able to walk him down. He's quite a big presence. Ty Mitchell's big as well, but so is Sean Hemphill, and he's just, like I say, going to non-stop walk him down, be able to take that punishment in which I don't think, of course, Idris Virgo wasn't able to take. And he's just going to show his size, show his, ability to be able to distribute shots well. He's not a crazily high level fighter, but I don't think that Ty Mitchell is either. So again, I think that Sean Hemphill is going to be able to cause the upset and be able to get the win. Moving on to the first MMA matchup, which is on a Misfits boxing show, and that is Dillon Danis versus Warren Spencer. It's very interesting to see that Dillon Danis is on this and being that first MMA fight. I'm sure that it'll be interesting to see how they get it licensed. Again, I have no idea where they find the judges and stuff like that. I think it's somewhere in Poland. It's quite a dodgy setup, to be fair, with Misfits in general, their whole licensing and stuff. But Dillon Danis has managed to worm his way into an MMA fight with Misfits. Misfits have been keen to have him back on, and I'm sure he didn't want to do boxing again. But he's not an awful, he is a good wrestler, and he is, gifted in martial arts. I don't think, he's bad at all. But it's just on the feet, I don't think he is very good, and, he's awful. So it's just, if he can get Warren Spencer to the ground, Warren Spencer's had a few, he's on a couple of wins now, and, he is a bit more of a boxer type guy. I respect him to take this fight on the ground, but, I think Dillon Danis is just going to get him to the ground, smother him, probably get a submission, or some sort of overwhelming ground kind of work that he's going to be able to land. If Warren Spencer goes to the ground with Dillon Danis, then it's just stupid. I think the only way he's going to be able to win is if he times him with like a nice uppercut or something like that. But I don't think that Warren Spencer has that much power. So yeah, I do inevitably think that Danis is going to be able to win this one, probably, by some sort of overwhelming movement on the ground, or a submission attempt or something like that. And again, he's got to try and reclaim a bit of self-confidence, I don't know, or like a bit of reputation, I suppose, as a good mixed martial artist, because this is his opportunity to showcase his actual ability in front of a big audience. And if he doesn't take that opportunity and he looks awful like he did against Logan Paul, then he's really going to get, even more hounded and harassed, and probably, shouldn't be getting given another opportunity if he loses this one. Moving on to speak about Joey Essex versus Numeiro. This is a bit of an interesting contest. I don't know much about Numeiro's boxing ability. I've seen that he said a lot about Joey Essex. It seemed that he is quite a confident guy coming into this fight. He's a Portuguese or Brazilian social media guy. Again, I don't really know a tremendous much about him. Joey Essex has been known in the UK scene for a while. He's been on, a few reality TV shows and things like that, and he's a bit of an internet personality. He's a confident guy who, always looks in good shape. But he's been, working with Tony Sims, and it seems like a lot of influencers have been going to work with Tony Sims in England, and that's probably thanks to Elle Brook. Elle Brook was able to have success with him, and and she kind of developed as a fighter under him. So it seems like that's kind of encouraged a lot more influencers to try and move to him. I think he is good as a boxer, Essex. I don't think he's awful. I think he can, showcase a decent level of skill. He hasn't had a boxing fight, from what I believe, of any kind. And again, I don't really know about Numeiro. I'm going to go with Joey Essex win. Again, it's not really based off a tremendous amount, but I've seen the pad work. He doesn't look awful. He looks like he knows where to put his punches, and I think it will be one of them fights where you kind of have to just go off how good Numeiro actually is when he comes into the ring, because he could be awful, he could be good. Again, we don't really know. But Essex, like I say, coming in good shape, good boxing ability, good person in his corner with Tony Sims. Like I say, he's improving and he's getting there. And hopefully, this is his time. I know he was meant to fight on a couple of occasions. He's been offered fights with Misfits and turned them down, but now he's actually fighting against someone. So, maybe he should have had enough training to be in a good position to fight Numeiro. Moving on to Chase DeMoor versus Nathan Marcon. This is a contest which hasn't really been promoted a tremendous amount, but Chase DeMoor has shown improvements. It's easy to show improvements from where he started, because when he came in, he looked awful. But again, he has showed improvements and he's become a bit of a dominant kind of heavyweights champion. And so, we would probably like to see him in against a Tempo Arts in a rematch or anything or something like that. But, like I say, he's been having success. He's been retaining the belt. He's been having multiple fights in random locations, not on Misfits, which have been interesting, but have seemed to develop his skill a bit more. But now he's in against Nathan Marcon, who I think is 3-0 in boxing. He fights in them kind of like Polish events, which are strange events. I think he fought in a 2-on-1 fight in a cage, very strange events. There was one fight in which Marcon, I think, quit in literally instantly. Like the fight started in like an MMA contest, and the guy started running at him, and he just leapt onto the floor, tapped out, tried to quit instantly, which was definitely not something which we'd want to see for this contest. But I think that Chase DeMoor is going to be able to win again. Nathan Marcon, I don't think is going to be very good as a fighter, and I think Chase DeMoor is improving, and I think this is another matchup which is going to favour him, and hopefully we actually get a good matchup. Chase DeMoor has talked about fighting many of guys. Roman Fury was one of them. That would have been a matchup in which I was, relatively intrigued to see how that would have gone, but of course that fell through. But hopefully we can actually find some sort of a half-decent matchup for Chase DeMoor next. Moving on to Carla Jade versus Daryn Harris. This is a fight in which is for some sort of Misfits women's title, and Carla Jade is an improving fighter as well. She didn't look as bad against Nikki Haru. That was quite a tough test, where she was going to have to battle it out, and she was able to bloody up Nikki Haru and have success on the back foot, just flinging out punches, using a bit of a range there. Again, it'll probably be scrappy, this fight. I mean, Daryn Harris has had one kind of social media fight, and she looked pretty much like a lot of the female fighters do on these shows still, where they're very sloppy and just slapping out punches in front of them and things like that. So I think Carla Jade's going to be able to win yet again with the size advantage, a reach advantage. I think she's going to be able to win. I would like to see some actual improvements again, but we will have to wait and see. Moving on to Amir Anderson versus Vitor Siqueira. I think this is actual, a decent contest. Amir Anderson, I'm still not entirely sold on him yet. I know he had a lot of, good amateur pedigree, and he's come into the Misfit scene and he's picked up a couple of easy wins against journeyman opponents. But Vitor Siqueira, I've managed to find some footage upon him, a Brazilian fighter, 8-1, I think. And like I say, he doesn't look awful. He can get a good KO. He can, box relatively well. He doesn't look completely out of his depth. Will we be able to beat Amir Anderson? Probably not. I still think that Amir Anderson's going to be able to win, but I think if they are progressing him in that way, it will get, of course, tougher and tougher, as it should do. And I will, like I say, be intrigued to see how far Amir Anderson can go, because they are putting, their eggs in that basket with Amir Anderson and Misfits, and so far so good, but how long will that last? Moving on to Demi Sims versus Nadeshi Hopkins. Again, another fighter being trained under Tony Sims is Demi Sims, and I don't know if there's any kind of family relationship there, but Demi Sims has been looking decent on pads again. She was meant to fight on that show that was with Dillon and Danis, which got cancelled. So, she is looking pretty good. And, like I say, she's, looking decent on pads. She hasn't had a professional fight yet, but this will be her first contest. Same with Nadeshi Hopkins. Again, she's, I think, a dancer of some sort and has had very minimal experience, isn't really getting trained with a high kind of level of team. So I do think that Demi Sims is going to be able to win. But again, not a fight which I'm really expecting a tremendous level of boxing. But I would be, I wouldn't be surprised if Demi Sims actually doesn't look too bad, and I would like to hope that she doesn't. Moving on to the final fight, which I'm going to speak about. Again, like I said, these kind of analyses are getting worse and worse, but it is Rahim Pardesi versus Amadeusz Ferrari. And Ferrari, of course, fought against Papi when Papi was coming off his loss. It was kind of like a comeback fight. And he was just all or nothing. He sprinted at him, throwing the biggest windmills I've ever seen, and just tried to rugby tackle him every 2 seconds. It was quite intense. But of course, after he kind of blew his gas tank out and realised he didn't really land anything, he was just very physical. Then he didn't really do a tremendous amount else and then got stopped in the end. And so that wouldn't surprise me if that happens again here. But, Rahim Pardesi hasn't really done a tremendous amount either. He hasn't fought anybody before or anything like that. So I am going to go for a Ferrari win. Again, I don't really rate Ferrari at all, but I think against somebody who hasn't had much boxing experience, really. I think Pardesi might have had one fight before on like a smaller show. I'm not entirely sure where, but like I say, I still think it's minimal experience. I think Ferrari's just overwhelming nature would probably be difficult for somebody like that with such minimal experience to be able to deal with. So I think, Ferrari might land one flush random shot, which will be enough to be able to get a win. But yeah, that is it for today's video. Hope you did enjoy. Like the video if you did like the video, subscribe if you're new, and thanks for watching.